name is John Carney. You might wonder why, and my colleague here, Jim Maltby, we're from the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory in the UK. You might wonder why on earth a couple of defence guys are standing up here to talk to you about creativity, but you'll find out in a minute, hopefully. The title of the slides here, the title of our talk is Never Outsource Your Imagination, and that came from a colleague of ours, Nicole Brandon, from the University of Dundee, who we're working with. So we're going to share our experiences of using creative writing as a thinking tool and as a personal development tool, not for any other reason. So the first thing to say, and I think it's important, is we work in a very serious organisation, part of the UK Ministry of Defence, and their role is to do applied research for the armed services. And so introducing the concept of something creative, wacky and fictional into that culture is quite a challenge for us. And that's the first thing to note. And that's been our journey, really, about making this subject acceptable and giving permission to colleagues to work with it as we go through. You can find out more about DSTL if you wish to by clicking on the links on the slide, which will be shown afterwards. And if you're not aware, we come from the UK, a set of islands on the north coast of Europe, if you haven't come across them before. So we're going to share, this is the format, we're going to share a bit about our experience. We're going to talk for about 10 minutes. We'll try and be brief, because the main purpose of today is to get you doing something and hopefully interacting, creating some stories. So we're going to share our experiences of using it as a thinking tool, as a futures tool, a little bit different for us. We've got about an hour's worth of a creative writing exercise, so we want to share some of what we've learned. We're going to build that around a particular technique that we've been taught during our journey. We're going to talk about some of the use and the challenges of using stories and creating them in a public sector environment, and take some reflections and questions at the end of the session. Can I tell you a story? So the phrase, can I tell you a story, I think the 6 words of that are sort of built into the psyche of humanity, really. They attract attention in a sense, in a primordial sense, well before the written story was ever created. And so I think they're important, certainly at the human level and the personal level. And I was conscious that at the speaker's dinner, the chief executive of the Dubai Futures Foundation was talking about the importance of stories and the fathers who created Dubai in history, and we had a look at the museum there. So stories are fundamental to humanity. Our organisation is focused on science and technology and its implications for security in particular. So science fiction has been one of the areas that we focused on more than anything. But what we're going to say today is true for any genre. It doesn't particularly matter what, but science happens to be our business. The other thing to say is I think it's important and influential. Anecdotally, there was a story many moons ago of President Ronald Reagan. He'd seen the the War Games movie in the US. I guess this was mid-80s. He visited a US command and control center, and he asked, well, where are all the screens then? Because he'd seen it in the movie, and he was concerned. After that, they put in a load of screens, really, to help their decision-making in the military. So it's influential as well as being important to humanity. So I'm going to just share, I've got 2 more slides before Jim speaks, and I'm just going to share a little of my own journey. I run an internal community for futurists in the UK, predominantly at DSTL, but in sort of the mid-teens, really, I guess, about 2016, 2017. A long-held ambition of mine was to float the idea of what value was science fiction stories and its analysis to the work we did. And it might sound an obvious question now, but it wasn't then, because within UK government it was very much a evidence-based mantra around government policy and hard evidence, and that came out of the Chilcot inquiry in sort of about 2010. So introducing something creative was actually quite a challenge. But the futures community were all keen on it, the futures analysis community, although it wasn't a form of analysis. And senior managers got wind of this, and they said, well, why not do something bigger? And the second thing, about a year later, we ran our first science fiction symposium, where we invited science fiction authors and humanities professors from across the UK. In particular, one of our colleagues, Will Slocum at the University of Liverpool, have a specialism there for science fiction. And so him and other science fiction authors in the UK, of which we have quite a number, we have a tradition in science fiction going back to H.G. Wells, I guess, came. And we looked at problems coming out of defence and security. What insights could science fiction tell us on how we might approach them differently? But no stories were generated. We had a large meeting, and I think we discovered we need a more intimate setting with a smaller number of externals and a smaller number of internal peoples to work together in a much more intimate way. And so what I did, I've been a Pink Floyd fan for many years, I created a retreat. We had 2 days away where there were only 20 of us, matched science fiction authors, academics, and ourselves, creating and trying new methods to create story. And we worked together. Jim and I wrote our first stories then. I'm very proud of that. I started my career as a physicist, so this is very uncomfortable territory for me at that stage. And we showed the principle of it. And more recently, then you can probably see the timeline, we had COVID. I've been running an internal development program to teach science and technology futures practice, and I'm in practice, not theory. And so one of the activities we threw in their direction was TWIST, story writing for science futures. Deliberately not science fiction, but science futures. Drew and our colleagues then at the University of Liverpool again and Dundee, and we've now run 3 sessions of about 6 months each, where individuals have been tutored in a variety of story writing methods. And what we're trying to encourage them to do now is bring alive some of the novel science, because the spirit of our horizon scanning program is finding really wacky, weird areas of science which are hard to communicate. So we've been doing that now for 2 or 3 years, and TWIST has become our primary product. And that's what we're going to be sharing today, what we learned through that project. So my last slide for the time being. So just a few things that have come out of the things that we started probably about 6-7 years ago now. The Olaf Stapleton Centre for Speculative Futures at Liverpool. As I say, they have the largest, I think, collated library of science fiction books in the world. Some work there interesting has been re-engineering ideas in classic science fiction texts for their applicability to defense and security challenges. So if you look back actually, what ideas can you get that might come back at you again that you can explore in a new way? Our colleagues in the cybersecurity area are linked there with Professor Genevieve Lively at the University of Bristol. She's a classicist actually, so Greek literature and things is her thing, but she's applying her understanding of literature to how do you turn cybersecurity policy into more attractive ways to communicate with the population. Quite a creative piece of work, and that's all published. I think you can get hold of those stories. Our colleagues in the Royal Air Force have been looking at future concepts for the Royal Air Force, and they've been encouraging military staff. A colleague of ours, Lieutenant Matt Brown, has been encouraging, and again, that's published material, stories with a very militaristic theme about future concepts. Bringing us up to date, a couple of new things. The British Science Fiction Association, a very well-established organisation, has been creating a timeline for us, colleagues actually rather than ourselves, based on some workshops led on defence and security challenges. And finally, you may or may not know, so in the US there have been a couple of authors, Peter Singer and August Cole, who were commissioned to write for the US Department of Defense, and some of our colleagues have asked them to bring alive some themes of science coming out of our internal research program. And so all the stories have been vetted and the science assessed by SMEs, but they're stories around the future, and that's again online. So I'm going to finish at that stage and hand over to Jim.
Hi everyone, it's a pleasure to be here. So just to continue on this slide, so there's 2 valuable kind of lessons I wanted to bring out from some of this experience. The first one is, one of the things we learned from the RAF's kind of use of stories was that they got personnel from the RAF to write those stories, and because they knew the RAF, they put in the little nuances of the organisation and little things which actually made them really engaging for the people in that service, because they recognised those kind of key bits. And the other thing was that by doing, you can see this kind of quite big time frame, by doing our initial work and seeding kind of some of these new, the use of stories and things, we haven't shown it on this timeline, but actually across UK government there's been a growing interest and appetite for doing this across government. So in some ways we'd like to think that we've generated the kind of space and permission for other people in UK government to do this and other bits of the Ministry of Defence. So to kind of talk about the purpose of stories and really explain a bit more about why we're using them and some of the purposes of that, this is how I kind of think about the future. So I started off doing lots of analytical, evidence-based futures for the Ministry of Defence in my career, and then no one paid very much attention to it. So I realised that we needed to get people to start engaging with it, and I went to the Oxford Futures Forum in 2014 and learnt about design and speculative futures and experiential futures with people like Scott and Lucy, who might be around, and other people. And that really persuaded me we needed to do something different. So a lot of the story writing that we're doing is trying to get people to pay attention to our work, so it's engaging them. And also, once you get them to pay attention, they're not always capable of understanding the analysis we've done or the futures. So there's a bit about training them and developing them, what some people call futures literacy, so developing that in order so that they can actually make effective decisions. One of the things that I'm really interested in, and one of our challenges, is actually, as Paul Raven talks about in one of his articles, radical speculation is a kind of necessary thing for doing future, so pushing people into spaces they're not comfortable with, which is really quite difficult. And in a research and development organisation, people feel that's not potentially very scientific. So this book on the left by Bill Bryson, one of the chapters in it is written by Margaret Atwood, and in that chapter she talks about the mad scientists, and she refers to the Gulliver's Kingdom and the mad scientists in that, and makes an analogy between the Royal Society and those people, because actually those, and she gives an example of crazy, slightly bonkers ideas, but actually, like Jim Data says, something mad about something useful about the future seems crazy at first, and she makes that link, which I think is really valuable, and that's what we're also trying to do in some of this work as well. And finally, on the book on the far right-hand side is a piece of work that was produced in the States, and it came about from two of the authors. There was one based in Japan and one based in the US, and they were trying to talk about strategy in a way that made sense to both of them, and they were really struggling because all the complexity of global politics and all these kind of things, and then they struck on the fact that actually talking about using Star Wars as the analogy enabled them to facilitate that conversation really effectively. So this book basically goes through different aspects of Star Wars to talk about bits of military strategy. They've done another version based on the Game of Thrones, and it seems to work quite effectively and is really engaging and fun to do at the same time. This is just to develop that idea of like science is, speculation is an important part of science, and as John said, we belong to a serious organisation. We need to do serious things. So this is just kind of part of that justification for doing that. And then when we talk about science fiction or speculative fiction, there is a tendency to focus on the technology, but the important thing I see in not just science fiction, speculative fiction, but our futures work is actually it's about social commentary and paying attention to those ethical and moral dilemmas and trade-offs and those complex things in society that we need to get to. And stories are a really good way of exploring those and engaging with those. And this is just to talk a little bit more about some of the work we've been doing around this as well. So this is a shot from our virtual reality Museum of the Future, which is based on the initial idea of the Museum of the Future here when I met Noah at the Oxford Futures Forum. So this is one of our worlds that is a speculative world, and it's based on a kind of climate future. So you can see just at the street level, there's some of the street lamps poking through the water. So this is a flooded city with an improvised kind of street along the left-hand side here. But this is part of a wider project where we were exploring different forms of fiction, so Black Mirror type videos, speculative fictions using Scott and Smithery to do that, and e-books and a variety of different things. And we put them all in a Museum of the Future, and this bit is specifically looking at the use of estrangement, which is a concept from science fiction, which is about making the familiar slightly unfamiliar to engage people and get them to think about different things, especially things they feel less comfortable about. And I'll explain a bit more about the psychology of that later on. But I'm now going to hand over to John, and then we're going to crack on and do a bit of hands-on workshop work.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So you've probably heard more than enough from us actually to get you going. So we'd like to get you hands on and actually pass some of the skills that we've learned through our humanities colleagues. So in a moment, we're going to talk. Our timing will be a bit more compressed on this. We worked to 2 hours, not an hour and a half. So first I'm going to talk a bit about story idea generation and theme. Theme being the purpose of, I'll say a little bit more about that. Character development and plot. So we want to talk a little bit about theme, character development and plot. These are core elements to win a good story. Presenting back on your tables will be something we encourage you to. Critical reflection from each other is an important part of story writing. And we want your experiences, your reflections on the experience. So theme. Anyone? So we're going to use Star Wars as a bit of a case study through our exercise. Very briefly, we're about to start. Anyone got an idea of what the theme, the underlying theme of Star Wars is? Has anyone seen? So I'm old. I remember the very first film, which actually became version 4. Anyone want to have a go? But it's obviously a bit about evil, good and evil, baddies and goodies and all that stuff. But my academic, Nicole, tells me it's about connectivity. It's a group of loners who actually work together to overcome the evil forces of the universe. So it's about connection at a very human level. And that's something as scientists we have to be reminded about all the time, the value of character. So, idea generation. So we're going to... I think we've got, as it says, instructions are on your tables. Before you get up, what we'd encourage you to do is go back in a second. But if you can mix up, perhaps try and sit next to people you've never met in your life before as an opportunity. Sit next to each other, do some introductions on the table. We'd like you to say who you are, where do you come from, and your favourite science fiction story and why. And on the latter part, if you could write it on a Post-it. And then in the meantime, what we'll do is pass around the instructions for the exercise. So we're going to talk you through one of the games that we've been taught for idea generation. And I've created material based on the themes around the conference, around the forum. So hoping some stories might emerge or ideas for stories that are suitable for today. So
and just before you move, it's worth saying that we've tailored this to an audience, to futurists who do world building every day, to people that have never done any creative writing at all. So don't feel too scared. Creative writing's difficult and challenging. We'll talk about that later. But we've set a structure to the exercise. If you want to do different things and go off piste a bit, it doesn't matter. And try and sit in groups of one to.
I'll come to that in a minute.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Support each other, and there's lots of people around, so if you're stuck, stick your hand up and carry on. So during the break, there's going to be some examples that are going to be flicked up on the screens on the side there. So,
absolutely. So I didn't want to preempt what the actual game is, so I would encourage you to just introduce yourselves for 5 or 2 minutes on the table. And as Jim says, we've got some examples of our own stories, and the ones our colleagues have written will be up on the slides. But it's really up to you. So you have a blank sheet of paper or a notebook, whatever story comes to your mind. Thinking about, we've all been in the forum for the last day and a half, themes and ideas that have struck you as in you can build a story around that idea. And it's very high level. If you only come up with a title in an hour, that's absolutely fine, or nothing at all. Just enjoy the experience, and we'll wander around in a minute and share a bit more. Is that okay? So just take a tip. Do you have a question? No, fine. So just sit at the back, and we'll come around.
So go and grab a table. Try not to sit with people you know, and then we'll come around and bring some more instructions to you once you've introduced yourselves to each other.
So I realise some of you are ahead of others, but just to say, if you could start to group yourself into 3s is a good number for the exercise, I would suggest. 3s and 4s. And what you can do, we'll now give you permission to open the envelopes. And what we'd like you to do, they're going to be, you're not allowed to cheat really, so don't pick something if you pick something you don't like the look of, try to stick with it for a bit. But in each of the envelopes, there's either a thing, a place, a person, or a problem. And the idea of the game is to see if you can connect those 4 things to give yourself a principle of a story. Now, if you haven't done this before, it might be good with just picking a couple of those things, see if you can connect those 2, and present what I would do, I suggest you take them all out individually, and then just present to your small group what you've got. And then if everyone does that, and then see if you can, maybe if you each share what you've got, your ideas in front of you, let everyone else see them, and then pick the one that that jumps out at you as the basis of an idea. So we're going to encourage you to work in small groups of 3 to come up with the ideas. It's hard to do with the larger group. You can work on your own if you prefer, or in pairs. But the important thing is to pick one idea from each of those 4 envelopes, present them to your colleagues, and think about, well, what story or idea does it say to you? So that's the first stage. We're just literally being creative.
So each individual should have one thing, one person, one place. But
And one problem.
so you just take one out of each each person. Yep. Yeah, one thing per person, one place per person, one person per person.
And I'd encourage you to write in your notebooks from the forum. So start to write down some ideas on a piece of paper or in your notebooks, just so that you've got something to refer to later. So later we're going to ask you to call out the idea of a story title that describes your story. Although it's cheating, you can swap the ideas if you find something a little easier. But don't be too soft too soon. Do just put your hands up at this stage if you haven't got the idea of a story or a bit of a title or a theme or anything, if you're struggling. Oh, that's good. I'm looking for a lot of arms down. That's great news. So somebody's waving, so that's fine. So I just want to say a couple of other things. So hoping you've got the germ of a story. We're looking forward to hearing some of those later on. A couple of other things I wanted to say that you build on. So we've talked a bit about idea generation and theme. Now, theme's a bit more advanced, some sort of subtle underlying message that you might want to convey through your story. And you can feed that back in later if it doesn't come up front. But the other thing to talk about are character and plot. And so coming back to the theme of Star Wars, some of you may remember it like me. Princess Leia, I don't know if you remember any of these characters and remember the original film. But you know, all of them have a role in the story, and that's their sort of superficial role and the role they play in the narrative. But the important part about an interesting story is their backstory. What are they like as a human being, and maybe what sort of history which is implied as the narrative emerges as to what sort of person they are and what motivates them. And so I don't know if any of you have a character in your story or characters yet, but start to bring one in. You obviously have a people idea, but you can play with that. You could give them a name, a sex, an age, you know, things like that, just to bring them alive a little bit and think a bit about their backstory, because that's what makes it interesting and how they might react to the scenario you create. So those are some examples there. So, and as I said earlier, the theme of Star Wars is around connectivity and team working, and that's what brings them all together. So those are the characters. So each, as I say, each one has a role or an upfront character, sort of persona, and underneath a backstory. Sorry, Jim, I saw you anyway. On plot, now this is just one example. Many of you will have heard of the hero's journey, I'm sure, but Christopher Booker was the first editor of a satirical newspaper in England called Private Eye, so a deep cynic, probably a natural futurist. There's a set of, if you like, archetypal types of story. There are many approaches to this, and this is his. If you go back to Shakespeare, for example, comedy and tragedy are good characterizations of story types. But they're, you know, overcoming the monster. And some examples, I hope some of those stories will be familiar to you. Apologies to a lot of British authors, but quite a lot of those are universal, I think. So from Harry Potter through to Romeo and Juliet and Titanic. But give you an idea, and you might not want to adopt those, but they give you an idea of a type of plot or a structure that you may wish to follow. Popular in Western culture, there's lots of variations on the overarching structure of a story, and this is the last slide I think I'm going to use here on plot structure, but you're really taking the reader through a bit of an emotional journey as well as yourself. And you're going up, and the 3-act structure is a very common sort of paradigm for the way in which a lot of Hollywood movies are created, Western books, all that sort of thing. But you need to think about inciting incidents or twists in the tale, and I think Jim will mention something more about that. Something where the anticipated course in the story diverts into a new and unexpected direction. And I think that's quite a useful tool, if you like, for futures, because you should be bringing the art of possibility to somebody. It shouldn't be so immediately obvious to them where that story is heading. So it's a chance to bring out possibility. But you might want to, the more brave of you might want to think about a few inciting incidents or plot points along the way, just a couple of bullets, really. So there we go. So we're going to, we put some waters on the table. So start to develop your story. So if you want to keep it simple, just develop your outline a little bit with some bullets. Use your notepads. We're going to ask for some feedback a bit later. As I say, have a go at developing a character. What could make them really interesting if you've got one already? Think about developing the story outline, story structure. So think about what plot and inciting incidents. And then for the incredibly brave of you, write a few lines of text. But that's very much a nice to have, not an essential. Jim, do you want to say anything? Are you good? So over to you then. So think about your characters. I think that's the next stage. It's the character that the plot is loaded on, really. They're the carrier, if you like, for your plot and theme. So have you got a really interesting character? You don't have to like them, but they have to be interesting. That's the important thing. So spend a few minutes. So I hope you don't mind, rather than the formal break, if you need a leg stretch, take it. But we've got some water on the table. Have a drink. Wander around, but do come back, please. And then we're going to ask for some feedback in about 20 minutes or so.
Okay, so do we have any people that want to volunteer to talk about their story to everyone else? So if you could give the title and then just a brief couple of sentences to summarize the plot. John's going to come around with the microphone for
that, yes.
whoever wants to do that.
Do put your hand up if you'd like to share your story with the wider group.
So my name is Munir. The person I have is a security guard. The thing is a machine that replaces human beings. The place is an office building, and the thing is a window. So what I imagined is the security guard being replaced by the machine. He's happy to be outside the office, contemplating nature through the window that he has, and for the first time in many years dared to step outside since the world was sufficiently polluted, not allowing them to live outside. And once he goes outside, gets bit by a bee, and the rest of the story you'll hear later.
We look forward. Excellent. Let's give you a round of applause. Excellent. Nice connection to regenerating nature there.
Hey everyone, we are really excited because nobody stayed on this table but the three of us, and then we had the addition in here. I will start with the title of the story, and my colleague Jasmine will continue. So our story is called The Snow in the Dollhouse. Ta-da!
That's it?
You continue now.
Our pointers were who owns me and unethical AI behavior. So we have a farmer who is living very much alone. He does not have a family. It is snowy in the winter, and he doesn't have much human interaction, and his soul level is very cold in human interaction. So he has ordered something on Amazon, and a package gets delivered to his door, and it's the wrong package. He only realizes when he opens it, and there's a dollhouse in it, quite a traditional dollhouse. So he kind of gets curious and unpacks it and starts to play with it. The dollhouse, nevertheless, is an AI going rogue. So while he is playing with the dollhouse, this dollhouse is learning everything about him, his behavior, his emotions, and is starting to look into his most longing desires, which is human bonding. And the AI starts to interact in his subconscious and creates a daughter for him to bond with her. So we see in his subconscious that he is dreaming up and fantasizing that he's a dad and, you know, he's co-living with his daughter, doing the dad-daughter things, you know, and creating more and more emotions. And the AI is getting smarter and smarter, basically addicting him to this fantasy of having a daughter, and he starts to believe that he has a daughter.
And all of a sudden, who is it? The Amazon delivery guy. What do you want? We gave you the wrong package. He goes crazy. He runs across the whole house looking for his daughter, which was never there. And then when he opens the door, they ask for the dollhouse. And he discovers that he has been always alone, but the system has made that illusion of a daughter. And he asks himself, who owns me? Let's give a round of applause to our director in here.
Thank you. That was a brilliant story. Very kind. I feel the emotion already, so thank you. I look forward to reading the whole story. That's brilliant. Anybody else? We must have another volunteer. Thank you. Please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paria. I had the awesome group of these two. They helped me form the story. Okay. We don't have a title yet. Maybe you guys can help me, but I'm going to start with a story now. It's 2023. We are located in the occupied land of Palestine. There's this young boy called Abdullah Mardini. He's 17 years old. His family, his city is being bombed. On a Wednesday afternoon, he's losing his parents. He has no hope. His family, his house, everything is destroyed. He goes to the beach, and he goes to the shore, and he sees a big ship. The government is announcing it's going to be the last ship of the day. It's his only chance to escape. He doesn't want to leave his hometown, his homeland, where he grew up, but it's his only chance to survive. He goes onto this ship. It's a cruise ship. He sneaks onto that ship, and he goes into a small room. No one knows he's there. He goes into a small room. It's very dusty. It's not a normal cabin. It's not a room. It's just a place where people store their stuff. There is one window. It's round. It's very small. And there's just bookshelves. There's different shelves, different stuff. He doesn't have access to bathroom, to any food, to nothing. It's his only way to escape. On the bookshelf, he finds one book. It's his favorite singer. It's the autobiography of his favorite singer. He opens that book, and every day he reads that book because in the night he doesn't have light. So the only time he can read is when the sun comes through the window. So he reads this book day and night. It's his only hope. And he gets inspired because deep down he's always wanted to be a singer. How does he sustain himself, though? He doesn't have food. He doesn't have a washroom. One day, one of the crew members, her name is Angel, she finds him. She has empathy with him. She's Israeli. And she promised him that she will support him. So what does she do? She brings him water. She sneaks him out to the bathroom. She doesn't tell anyone that he's there, and she's very loyal to them. After a few days on the ship, he tries to practice singing because he's inspired by the autobiography of a singer, his role model. He tries to sing, but he has to be careful. He has to be very, very quiet because no one can hear that he's in the small room. Only Angel knows. He practices and he practices. One day, the ship stops. They finally reach their destination. Angel helps him to board, to go and leave the ship to find a new home. They actually arrive in the hometown of Angel, which is Egypt. Her family migrated from Israel to Egypt many years ago. She takes him to his family, and they adopt him. That's the end of the story.
Thank you very much.
Another brilliant. I'm just conscious both stories had a lot of detail and emotion in them, and very different. Marvellous. Really came alive for me. Have we got time for one more, Jim? Or?
I think we're going to crack on and then we can take some questions.
Fine. Well, thank you ever so much. Well done, everybody.
So, thank you. Those stories were brilliant, and they're really quite sophisticated stories in a really short amount of time. So I'm really impressed. It's amazing. But I was expecting to be impressed being here, so thank you very much. So I'm just going to finish off by talking about some other elements of story writing, and then some of the challenges and other things that we've come across in doing this work. So one of the key things once you've written your story is about how you edit the story. So what you leave out is quite often just as important as what you have in the story. So if you leave lots of detail out about a thing that people are using, then people have to fill that in with their heads, and that's much richer quite often than actually writing it all yourself. So you're not telling the people what it is, they're filling in all the blanks, and that's really powerful. As you may have found in your groups, actually bouncing ideas off people really helps you develop that story. It also helps you understand. So in some of our exercises, the academics who helped advise us said, actually, if you change the tense of this, it makes this story far more powerful. So having peer review and that a safe kind of group of people and community that allows you to bounce those ideas off is really important. And then I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can structure your story to engage it for the purposes that you want. So the reason we're using stories, as I alluded to before, there were different kind of purposes within our foresight activities of where we were going to use them. So how you structure the story helps with some of those engaging in those places where you want to use them. And also they help provide some of the reasoning and explanations that you might want people to understand, and you can tie that all into the story and the structure and the way that you put things together. So an example of kind of using structure is putting a twist in the tale, and some of the stories you've talked about already, and John talked about before, have twists in the tale. So this is, in psychology, they call this the curse of knowledge, I think. I can't remember it, but I think it's the curse of knowledge. So essentially, when you have a twist in the tale, you say, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and then people automatically project that kind of linear trajectory of the story forward to what's going to happen in the future. And actually, by putting a twist in the tale and throwing it off into a different direction, you can use that as a helpful way of... So if you want to get people to think about things that are implausible to them or more difficult or challenging, you could put your twist in that space. And then by putting the twist in the tail, so how a twist in the tail works is once they get to that twist in the tail, they retrospectively rebuild their reasoning, so it kind of, they feel comfortable being in that space where they were, where you've taken them. So it allows you to get from people who are quite fixated in a narrow space into something much broader, and to deal with more challenging concepts. Hopefully that makes a bit more sense. And one of the things that we've understood by going through this experience of learning to write stories and creative writing is that actually it makes you much more critical in how you view other people's narratives, the agendas that people have in their work. And so I now can't watch movies and read novels without thinking about plot structure, characters, themes, and all these things. But I think that critical thinking element is really key to our futures work anyway, so it's a really helpful skill to develop by doing story writing. And then as we've gone through this work, we've come across lots of challenges, and some of the challenges we've tried to address through doing this. So as individuals, as we talked about, we were trying to, what we were trying to do with our twist work was essentially, when people are outside of work, they're much more open, creative, and relaxed about what they talk about, and freer with their ideas, and that's what we were trying to, the kind of space we were trying to create, and also what we were trying to get today on your table, so hopefully it was fun and engaging. But also, writing stories as an individual, quite often there's unlike writing reports, there's a personal element to it because we have people and characters and emotions. So it's really important to create a safe space for that, and that takes us on to groups and having communities and people that help support people in doing that is really important. But it's a challenge to do in organisations like ours to carve out that space and time to do it. And then that kind of links into organisations giving you permission and time to do this and explore this and accept this work as being useful and of real value. And some of that links into Scott and Susan's book, Future Cultures, talks about some of the stuff that John and I have been doing, and they're signing books as well today, and you can buy their book if you want. But I've not got any attribution to the book, so other than being quoted in it. So that's the end of our session, really. We just wanted to get some reflection from you. So from us, really, our key messages are we've tried to describe the creative practice we've developed and used in having stories, and our experience of applying it in the UK government and in our work. And what we'd like from you guys is, how did you find that experience? Do you have experience of writing stories externally, and how does that differ or relate to what we've been talking about? So the rest of the time now, apart from the very end when Patrick's going to talk, is for you to give us a bit of feedback and some thoughts or questions generally.
So keen to hear back from anyone, experiences of today and your broader experiences of using writing. The other thing I don't think I did say, but some of the people on the training scheme that we've run are now writing stories internally on real research topics and bringing them alive, and nearly being commissioned to do them in the way they were.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the team process. It brought me to, first of all, I don't have experience of writing in a team process, and I loved it because it really brought me every time to points that I did not expect, and they were extreme points, and I had an uncomfortable feeling in my stomach, and then I opened up and said, okay, yes, let's take that. And then the really exciting part only started afterwards. And then the whole thing unfolded, and then I started to love it, and then the creativity was pouring out more. So I thought that team process was great, and then also being under pressure with the time, I think helps a lot, because it stops us waffling into directions. It makes it really sharp and focused and fast. And yeah.
My personal reflection on this was, so many times when you are part of a team, you got to understand the role you want to take in, and these may not be the most comfortable roles. So today was like one of those days. I'm generally very vocal. I decided to figure out what does it feel to be somebody on a sideline and be a contributor rather than a leader. And I think as a perspective, if I look back, for me, understanding that part of team dynamics as a part of this workshop, which I was not expecting, was a great takeaway.
Thank you. Oh, great. Okay, that's lovely to hear. I really hope you'll all write your stories up. I'd love to see this one in print, actually, and all the others.
So my experience was that it was enjoyable to write with the group. We had a really nice story. But the whole time, I was wondering, how is this a futures something or other? And so I'm wondering if you have any, like this is an exercise you could use to make any kind of story. And so how do you make it more future-oriented in practice? And what are some of the tips there? Because I'm curious about that.
No, that's fine. And so Jim might have a better answer, but I would say, you know, I don't know how much I emphasized it, but I work in a very analytical, hard science, physical sciences environment. And so the people that we were teaching were very comfortable with doing the maths and the modeling, but they've never written a story, basically. So it was really partly a tool to get them to think differently and think about the implications of their work. So they're coming up, we do have an extensive horizon scanning process. They find interesting signals, but so what? So this is a way of them bringing those alive a little bit and giving them confidence. That would be my argument. It depends. We haven't had a long debate on what futures is and what futures isn't, but for me it's about finding the possibilities from things and coming up with unexpected consequences. So story creation as much as writing and reading is a good way to do that. So that was our purpose, really, and to give permission to the people, our employees, our colleagues, to be more creative and to be allowed to do it. I mean, I can't, as a civil servant, you're asked to write in the third person. This was done, that was done. There's no sense of identity. And as Jim touched on, it's interesting how people have, and it became quite a contentious bit, they felt a lot of ownership over their stories.
It kind of depends, as I talked about earlier on, it depends on the purpose of what we're trying to do in kind of the future space. So I think the lady over there who was talking about before about how she felt really uncomfortable, and then kind of once she got past that, it unlocked it, and she felt it much more easier. So in some ways, that's an element of futures literacy, as we want people to, you know, be challenged and then actually get over those challenges and be able to have more freedom and think more broadly. Is that element of reperceiving that POAC talks about and things like that. So we can use it for that. There's more advanced story writing techniques where you're trying to do things for a specific purpose. So if you're trying to think in a time frame about a technology or something, you can write the story differently, but some of that takes more skill and things as well.
Yeah, I also have a question more than a reflection. I was wondering, because now we're picking a character, and of course we did it by picking one from an envelope, but I wonder if you write for a broader audience as a government, for like the whole country maybe. How do you pick your character so that...
So there is no right, we've just in a sense shown one very simple exercise. I mean, if I was doing it for my environment and culture, I'd be picking, say, a general or a senior politician and start to build in some characters who are stakeholders in the game and trying to bring that alive, or maybe a soldier or civil servant, or try to bring relevant characters in and write a story in that way. I guess it depends on your purpose of your story, whereas we're having I would say, developmental exercise today. You can write to type, and, you know, although I find this exercise quite difficult personally, I know the two or three stories I've written, their ideas have come to me and I've built on them. Just
before I hand over to Patrick, there's a lot of people that have helped us on our journey, and just to acknowledge here, so the list of names is there. Some of our colleagues from DSTL, but also from academia in the UK and wider than that as well. And then we're happy to share the slides, and there's a load of references to things we've talked about at the end there. And to say thank you very much for all your participation and engagement. You've been brilliant. And thank you for Dubai Futures Forum for allowing us to run this workshop, because it's been great. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I'm not going to keep you long, also because I'm out of voice. This was a lovely session. I just heard the feedback, and it was interesting, inspiring, funny, sad, and I think it's all of the elements that are needed for a good story. When we spoke, Jim, John and I, a few months back, saying that we'd like to have a session of this kind here, I thought it was a really good idea, because to the question that was raised earlier, how is it relevant to futures? One of the projects I was working on years ago was trying to anticipate what some of the materials of the future might look like. And people came up with quite wild ideas. And so what transpired was that those kinds of materials of the future, it might take decades before those materials are a reality. And then the next question is, what kind of policy do we need to think about in order to regulate, or at least think in terms of how do we manage those materials, how we might apply them. But I think regulation was quite a big question there. So people said, hang on, we're talking about materials that don't exist yet and won't exist for generations, so why do we even need to think about some of the regulation? And so people couldn't really wrap their heads around. And one great way to do that was through storytelling and science fiction, perhaps. People will engage with a story in a much more meaningful way on border issues, on limit issues, than they would if it was a policy piece. And I think that's just a way for us to open people's minds. So I hope you were inspired by this. And back to the conversation we had a few months ago, Jim and John said, oh, we'd like to have that session. I think it'll be relevant for about 7 or 8 people. And then we said, nah, I'm sure there'll be like 12 or 15. So we just amplified this, and it became bigger. And I'm really pleased we had it up here, because clearly the interest is huge, and the uptake has been significant. So the offer here that I'd like to present is, if this has been inspirational to you, if you think now that you want to go away and put pen to paper or finger on keyboard, and your organizations will allow you that time and space, or in your private time, you take that time and space to develop your stories further, we'd be happy to receive them. So it might interest to know that the next Dubai Future Forum is only 52 weeks away. At that point in time, we are considering, we'll be delighted to have an edition of stories that have been created by you, perhaps by your circle of friends as you speak to them coming away from this session. So we'd be delighted to receive those stories. I would say, let's limit them to 2,000 words. Let's not write tomes. Let's be short, sharp, concise in the exercise. It's not a competition. If we are inundated with a large amount of stories, then we'll ask for help of people who have perhaps a keener eye than myself to review those stories and make sure that they're tight, that they can be sharpened, and that they're ready for publication. You've all been contacted by us through an email, which is forum@dubaifuture.ae. Send your stories to us. We'll do our level best to ensure that they're part of that publication. And this is really all I wanted to say, other than please thanking me again. Help me thank Jim and John, our dynamic duo of this session. Thank you so much, everyone.